Right. Hey, Sam, welcome to Holistic Health Masterclass podcast.
Great to be here, Brett. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome. And, one of the subjects that I've really been focused on, this is actually the first episode of season 4, by the way.
Awesome.
It's
Glad to
actually
kick it off
it's
with you.
quite serendipitous that you're on the show, because one of the themes that I'm really driving home as we kind of get further into the pandemic and stuff that's going on in the world is resiliency. And we know that a lot of what's happening on the resiliency side of things is people are just being worn down, right? We're being worn down, we're being ground down. And of course, as we're going to talk about today, one of the consequences of that is people with addictive tendencies, with self-sabotaging behaviors. Those things tend to resurface, and that's why we're starting to see now people dying of drug overdoses, alcoholism, disruption of family units, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, welcome. And I guess let's just start off with your background, because you have a pretty crazy story and how you came to be here, and also tell us a little bit about your I guess segue into your organization and a little bit about what that does as well.
Yeah, sure. So my journey started in Vermont. And growing up in Vermont, by all accounts and from an outsider's perspective, and for me, for a long time, I was I had this amazing childhood, skiing all winter, playing tennis and golf all summer. Not a lot really, no abuse or anything terrible like that. And the reason I say that now is because there's a lot of people that suffer from addiction, which I did later in life, that have a lot of stuff like that, external stuff going on in childhood. But my childhood was full of illness. So I had really, really severe asthma, a long list of food allergies. I mean, anything from strawberries to pork to peanuts to legumes,
Wow.
coconuts, just a ton of stuff, eggs. And so, I was basically, from a very young age, I was really scared of the world. Every spring, I would end up in the hospital for probably every year for the first 13 to 15 years of my life, probably 3 or 4 weeks a year, I was in the hospital
Wow.
with either
Crazy.
a peanut, eating a peanut, having allergic reaction, anaphylaxis, or more commonly, it was asthma attacks. Like in the winter, I would get an asthma attack in the middle of the night when it's super cold and dry. In the spring, the pollen would come in, from being in Canada, those yellow clouds of pollen that just
Yeah.
float across the sky. For me, that's I look at that and I'm like, oh gosh, this is going to be death. And so I had this childhood that, as a child, I didn't really have a frame of reference. It was just, this is the way it was for me. I had to be really conscious of my breath. I had to be really conscious of what I ate. I had to be really mindful of, keeping an inhaler on me. And so, I didn't have that frame of reference. Now, going on later in life, one thing that I did recognize as a kid was that I really, really hated social situations, like birthday parties. In Vermont, there's a lot of farm stuff, like horse rides and stuff like that. And it would always be a very, very traumatic experience for me because of, one is that built-in fear. Like, what if I get an asthma attack and my mom's not there to rush me to the hospital? What if I eat a peanut and, I don't have an EpiPen nearby? Or, a lot of times for me, the breathing, that other kids would make fun of me for the way I was breathing.
Hmm.
And so I had this evidence that the world is a scary place and I'm better off just staying at home. So I would avoid social situations a lot. And looking back, this was the precursors to severe social anxiety. And so when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was at we belonged to a country club in Vermont, and I was a golfer, loved playing golf. But one day I picked up a tennis racket, and it turns out that it felt good in my hand, and I had really good eye-hand coordination. I was fast. So I just picked up tennis like it was, second nature for me. So I made a decision pretty quickly that my life was going to be based around tennis. And now tennis for me meant that it was something that I loved to do. I was really good at it. I started getting accolades right away, winning tournaments and getting trophies, and my name's on the wall at the country club and all this stuff that felt really good as a kid that had been kind of fearful of a lot of things. It was a really nice little outlet for me. And it provided me also as a built-in excuse to not go to social events, because tennis, so in New England, I would spend most of my weekends playing tennis tournaments around Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, Connecticut, all those places. And so I had a reason not to go to these parties now. And this was like heaven for me, because I didn't have to like call up and say, I don't want to go to this party anymore. So tennis played a lot of roles for me. It was my first love, and it was also my first savior. Like it saved me from having to deal with those social situations that I really, really hated. Now, so tennis was I committed to tennis. And so basically tennis took me all through college. Through high school, I was ranked #1 in the state of Vermont. I went to a boarding school in Florida for a year before college, got recruited to play tennis at a college in North Carolina. And, everything was pretty good. I kind of found my groove with everything. And then after college, I stopped playing tennis. And again, like, it's really easy to talk in hindsight, but at the time I didn't recognize it, but my identity had been stripped away. Tennis was
how so? How do you feel? And also, I guess I have a second question there. Like, what made you stop playing tennis suddenly?
So the tennis thing was what made me stop playing tennis was that after college, like I had designs on being a professional tennis player pretty much until the end of college, my senior year of college. And a couple things happened. One is when I was a freshman, I blew my knee out playing basketball. And so that was the first time in 20 years that 15 years that I hadn't been playing tennis basically every day. And so I figured out that it was kind of like the social anxiety wasn't really a thing anymore. And like I was at college, so we were, drinking, and I realized that drinking kind of like puts all those voices to bed with the anxiety. And so I kind of had this taste of, maybe there's something else besides tennis. Maybe I'm, I like this socializing. I like making friends. I like going to play golf with my buddies. I like going to football games. Like there are all these things that kind of cropped up. Now, to say that at this point, like after that knee injury, I was still dead set on getting back to playing on a tennis team, getting back to be a professional tennis player. But a seed had been planted that, like tennis is a major commitment. To be a professional tennis player, there's no off season. You're playing all year round. Like even right now, they're playing the final 8 of the whole ATP tour is playing in London, and they're going to play all through up till January, and then the Australian Open starts. So, my senior year, I was on the tennis team, and my coach, I was struggling with tennis. I was pretty much I was burnt out. I'd been playing. I was 23 at this point. I'd been playing every day since I was 7. And I had kind of lost interest in playing on the tennis team at college. So my coach was like, I'm not going to take your scholarship away, but I think that your run on the tennis team here is done. He's told me I was burnt out, and I didn't have much of an argument. I was like, I'm kind of done. And so that was the end of my tennis career. And again, like it wasn't like I wasn't upset by it. I thought it was the end of my college tennis career. I was planning on playing some tournaments after college and seeing how that goes. But then it occurred to me, this was in the fall, so it occurred to me over the year that this level of commitment that I needed to be a professional tennis player, I didn't have that in me. I didn't have the desire to give up my friends and give up like all this life that I was experiencing to go play tennis. So I basically let it fall away.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, again, I didn't realize at the time, but like, that tennis it was a huge part of my life, like for one, it helped with the social anxiety. It gave me confidence. It gave me accolades. It was my identity. Like I was a tennis player. Like in college, people knew me as the guy on the tennis team, and go back to my hometown in Vermont, people still, if you bring up my name, they're going to be like, oh, you're a tennis player, right? And so like, it's this, I have this attachment to it. And now, so when the tennis went away, I was kind of lost. I didn't spend much time in college studying. I was more focused on the tennis and eventually the partying and the girls the senior year. And so I had a sports management major, but again, like I didn't have much to fall back on.
Yeah.
So I got a job at a bank in North Carolina in Charlotte, and and this is when the drinking picked up. And I was living with, it was me and 4 other buddies of mine in this big house in North Carolina, right downtown. So we would drink Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. Early 20s, you can recover pretty quickly. There was no real consequences, but this was the first sign of some problems coming. Like I could say like I was doing what everyone else was doing, but I was also the only one doing it to the extent that I was doing it. Go ahead.
Yeah. So do you feel like at that time, were some flags kind of going off even when you were young? Or because look, I've also had my own issues with that.
Mm-hmm.
I won't get into all of it because I have spoken about it on the show before, but I didn't really know about it at all. Like when I was younger, you're just like, oh, well, this is just how everyone is, right? This is what's
Right.
going on around you.
Yeah.
I grew up in the music scene. I
Mm.
have a music production background. I DJ'd all over the world, party, 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 right? So it's
Yeah.
like, well, this is just what everyone does. And it kind of took me much later in life, post trauma, post whatever, to kind of realize like, okay, well, hang on a second, like this is not how everyone else behaves. But yeah, so as a young guy in your 20s, like, did you kind of get any flags there or no?
If I look back now, yes. At the time, no. It was just like
Yeah,
you said, like it was like I was just in that was my lane and that's what I was doing. Now, if I look back, I can say like I got drunk twice in high school, and then in college a couple times I had some experiences where I was like, nothing bad happened, no DUIs, I didn't like no real harm, no jail, nothing like that, but it didn't sit well with me how it all went down. And I
yeah,
just chalked it up as like, oh, that's just like every now and then you get a bad night when you drink. Like
yeah,
that's what it
yeah,
was.
yeah.
And so there were definite red flags though. I mean, as far back as 16, 17.
Right.
Um,
So another question for you, do you feel, I think identity, you bring that up, it's such an important aspect of all of this, right? Because I think when people talk about identity and loss of identity, it's a
mhm,
loss of self, like a sense of self.
mhm.
And there needs to be something to fill that void.
Yep.
But I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit later on. I think the equal identity is also for people that are on the addiction cycle, that do have substance abuse issues. That's also your identity, right?
Yeah.
And so, for me, I used to smoke a lot of pot when I was younger, and I remember when I stopped smoking pot, like now, whatever, I'll dabble here and there and whatnot, but it's not my thing anymore at all.
Hmm.
But at the time, I just remember when I stopped smoking, all of a sudden, like all the people around me, like my relationships changed, everything changed around me, and it was like, who am I all of a sudden, right? Like
Hmm.
everyone knows you as part of the circle. Like you're just gonna go and smoke a couple bongs, or you're gonna
Yeah.
smoke a couple joints and have some beers, and all of a sudden, when you don't do that anymore, like your identity is just gone. So do you
Yeah.
feel like that's a pretty prominent theme, whether it's pre addiction or post addiction?
Yeah, absolutely. Because like identity, it's identify. Like you identify with a certain thing, you identify with a certain group of people, and that becomes you fit in there, and it feels good to fit in, and people want to fit in. There was a huge disconnect for me, even with the drinking. Like I remember there was one time I was in North Carolina, and I walked into a bar, and my first thought was like, I'm not this cool. Like these
Mm,
people all were excited to see me, and I was thinking, why? Like
mm,
because I still had, honestly, like my part of my identity was like that socially anxious, sick little kid that got picked on. And so like I didn't, and I drank over all this. I drank. First of all, it was tennis, covering that up, which is fine and healthy and good, and it
yeah,
provided me a lot of things. But for then after tennis left, I started like, that stuff crept back in, that social anxiety, and like that, all that stuff crept in, and it was like, okay, so I love going out, but I can't do it sober. I love going on dates, but I can't do that sober. I love going to concerts, but I can't do that sober. Like, how am I going to continue to live a life that I love without, and this is like the conversation that I had later on, but like without drinking. Like at first drinking was like, I didn't think anything of it, didn't connect any of the dots. It was just like you said, like I was doing what everyone else was doing. This is what we did.
hmm,
Everyone in the house, we all had a good time. My identity shifted from tennis to rock star. Like
yeah.
it became like, if you wanted to have a good time, call Sam. And honestly, I had no problem with that. I
Yeah,
was like,
hey, it's a lot of fun, right? At the time, it's
yeah,
a lot of fun. But I feel like, as we're chatting here, I feel like what happens in those situations is you kind of paint yourself into a corner, right?
100.
Eventually you just like you're known as that guy, and you kind of can't step out of that role at all. And then you're sort of like, well, if I can't, everything starts to revolve around whatever the substance is, right? And you see that play out in society so often. It's like, well, we can't do something unless we have a drink, right? So, you can go play
Yeah,
around a golf, but you're going to throw a six pack in your bag because we're not also going to have drinks while we play golf. And then,
right.
we're going to go watch fireworks, but we're also going to have a drink. And I think that when you kind of peel away from that, it's kind of terrifying for a lot of people because, again, as you said, your social circles change, you know, how am I going to do it without the
Yeah,
thing, which
right.
is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, because you don't know who you are.
Yeah.
You're so wrapped up in. I remember one time I went out to a bar, And this, like, there would be nights when I wouldn't drink. Like, I was one of those bingers, you know, like if I could go weeks without it and be fine, but if I got it in me, all bets were off. I was going for 3 or 4 or 5 days. And
Yeah.
I went out one night, and I remember like showing up at the bar, and everyone's like, "Hey, Sam, like psyched to see me because we're going to go dancing and do all the things." And like, "What are you drinking tonight?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm not drinking tonight." And they were disappointed.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
were like, "Oh, we're not going to get the version of Sam that we love," is what I interpreted that as. And
Well,
so,
yeah, I think what also happens though is you start bringing up reflections in other people, right? Because
yeah,
other people start looking at you and going, "Oh, geez, like now do I drink too much?" And they start
yeah,
thinking about themselves, right? And then it's
absolutely.
like, okay, hang on a second, and then they start questioning who they are and their behavior, which
Yeah.
can make people pretty squirrely, you know?
Pretty uncomfortable. If you're not ready to look in the mirror and you have to
Yeah,
look in the mirror, it's not
yeah.
very comfortable.
So things, obviously I've read up on you, listened to some of your stuff out there. Things got pretty bad for you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you really spiraled downhill before you kind of sorted yourself out.
Yeah, there was a couple marker. I mean, so 23 to like 30 was like kind of that hard charging, hard partier, no real consequences, but also I was always the guy that was more fucked up than everybody else. Like
Yeah, yeah,
that was kind of there. But you know, I got married in that span. I got married and divorced. I was able to hold down jobs. Like, you know, again, no jail, no hospitals. Like no real consequences except that there were some tough conversations because I would behave like a drunk.
sure.
And then I got divorced at 29, and at age 30, I moved down to Miami from Fort Lauderdale. And this was the first time. So this was the first time in probably like 10 years that I didn't have like a governor on my life. So for the longest time through college, basically I had tennis. And then for a couple of years, senior year of college and a couple of years after, I didn't really have tennis, but I had a job, and I was trying to maintain a job and all that. And then I got married, so I had that in my life. And then at age 30, I was divorced, single, living in Miami, doing commercial real estate, and it was like all bets were off. I mean, it was like, you know, they say with addiction, it's a steady decline, and then eventually you hit the cliff, and it's a sharp drop. So from age 30 to 33 was my sharp drop,
Okay.
and it turned into like, I mean, the cocaine was a lot of cocaine, just pretty much every week. Every time I drank, I was doing cocaine. It started to show up as like, man, maybe not making it to work on Friday, probably not making it to work on Monday because Sunday fun day. Like
Yeah.
the party started to bleed and ripple into the rest of my life, and so I started to feel the repercussions of all this.
Mm.
And so at age 33 is when all the consequences, like I had consequences in between 30 and 33. My troubled relationship with my girlfriend. My family started asking questions. My friends were kind of like, dude, what's going on with you? Like those questions that come that you're like, I got it. And then you stop for 30 days and everyone's like, oh, you're fine. Like, cool. Good for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so at 33, so I turned 33 in December. And then in March of that following year, I got not my first DUI. It's actually my third DUI, but the first one that I went to jail for. And so I ended up getting in an accident. It was like 10 in the morning in Coral Gables in Miami. And I T-boned another car going through an intersection. I hadn't had any sleep. I'd been up all night drinking. And I was just looking away from the road and T-boned a car. And so that triggered my first trip to rehab. And I went to this rehab thinking like, you know what, like I kind of recognized that there's something going on here. Like this is not a good stretch. Like there's, the job is suffering. I just wrecked a car. My girlfriend's asking all these questions. We had broken up for a little while. My family's like, what are you doing? And so I'd kind of like, it was one of those things where like, I'm going to go away and give everybody else a timeout because you
Mhm.
guys need to check yourself because
Yeah.
I'm fine, but I'm going to go away to just get some rest and regroup, and I'll come back and I'll be fine.
And I mean, at that point as well, not to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to venture out and take a guess. You probably thought that if you just took a break and then came back, that you could just get control over it, right? And you could just keep on going. And I'll just cut back a bit here and there, and maybe I'll only do it on Fridays and Saturdays, because that's like the pattern as well, right? People start thinking, I call it dancing with the devil.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, okay, well, look, I was doing it 5 days a week, but if I just do it once or twice a week and I don't get too out of control and people don't notice, well, that's probably okay. That's fine now. Did you kind of experience anything like that?
Yeah, I pretty much have nothing else to add.
All right.
That's exactly how it happened. Like, I was like, you know what? I'll just stop at, instead of having 15 drinks, I'll stop at 5. You know,
Yeah.
I'll still be able to have fun and have a good time, but I won't get to the point where I'm missing for 4 days over on South Beach doing whatever.
So what for you was like the big kind of breaking point where you just said, okay, cool, enough's enough. I gotta just like turn my life around. I gotta do something else. And then, yeah. So what was that like? When was that point? What happened?
So from age 33 to 38 is when that happened. It's actually, you know what? 8 years ago tomorrow.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I was 38 years old, but between 33 and 38, so I went to that rehab. I went to rehab again that year in the fall of that year. I went to rehab again in 2010, and then I did a bunch of outpatients in like 2011, and then 2012 is when I was 4 a.m. on November 21st, 2012. And I was sitting at and in that time, the 33 to 38, I got cancer in my mouth twice. I fell off a balcony, 35 feet, walked out of the hospital,
Wow.
multiple hospital stays. Probably, I think I lost track of how many times I got arrested for drunken publics or, like just overnight stays in jail, but it was a lot.
Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is all compressed into 5 years. So I was sitting there at my kitchen table by myself, looking at a pile of drugs, bottle of rum, and I just at a moment for a moment, like all that stuff that happened from 23 to 38, because at this point I was hyper aware of the pain I had caused other people,
Sure. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pain I had caused myself. Like I was very aware. I had a year of sobriety before this last bender, and so I was just like, it all came rushing to me. It all came rushing and like was staring in front. My dad's face was in front of me. My mom's face was in front of me. My sister's crying was in front of me. Like my physical and emotional pain was in front of me. All of it was right there. And I just said to myself, I was like, I don't know anything about what's going to happen, but I know that I can't face tomorrow and I can't go on like this. And so
Yeah.
that was it. That
So
was the
full,
end.
yeah, breakdown to breakthrough, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just,
So from there, obviously you've done. I mean, obviously you've done a lot of work on yourself. You're helping other people to do the same. So
yep.
maybe let's just kind of move a little bit forward into your project right now. Maybe share a little bit about
Mhm.
what your mission is and your project
Yeah.
and how you help men.
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of my company is the Unbreakable Human Collective. So we as a human race are a collective, but it's very important that we take care of ourselves to better the collective. So I started my kind of like coaching career as a personal trainer in 2014. Did that for 4 years, and I moved into kind of helping just general like life coaching kind of stuff, like just whatever's going on. And then I shifted that into, my sister passed away in 2018 from alcoholism.
Hmm.
And so I
Yeah.
shifted into like, she was a silent sufferer. I was not a silent sufferer. Like it was basically blasted over the TV. Like it
Yeah.
was loud in everyone's face. I was falling off balconies. I was getting DUIs. There was no hiding it. But I recognized that like there's a ton of guys out there that suffer in silence. And so I shifted my focus of my coaching to helping guys not so much get sober, but like when they're first sober, the first 30, 60, 90 days,
Mm-hmm.
when they basically have to learn how to live again. Because that was my big thing, was like, I could stop, but staying stopped was always the problem because I didn't know how to live without it. So if you can handle, I learned that if I can handle, from my experience, I was able to handle the things that fueled my drinking. So if I could help these guys overcome these things that fueled their drinking, I could keep I couldn't keep them, but I could help them not drink again and be better husbands, better brothers, better fathers, better sons, all the things.
Yeah.
And so from there, it became very apparent to me that every single guy that I was helping suffered with some sort of anxiety or depression. And
So,
so,
so yeah,
go ahead.
so perhaps like is that like one of the sort of common themes or common threads that you see with all of the guys that you work with,
I would
or
say,
are there more? I mean, are there others that you want to share?
well, so what I do now is a little less around the mental health, but it's more around the silent stories that we tell ourselves, the things that get in our way, the things that block us. So the analogy that I use a lot is, like I work with a lot of guys, CEOs or athletes, actors, those kind of people that have reached a certain level of success in their life, the mountaintop, so to speak. But they get to the mountaintop and, they see on the top of the mountain is this beautiful pasture with maybe a beach and a lake and palm trees and whatever else is up there, that all the things they want in life, right? All the things they've worked for to this point. But they get to that end of that path and there's a glass wall in front of them. and they can't see the glass wall, but they can see what's on the other side of it, all this life they want. But
Mm.
they can't see they can't see why they can't get to the pasture from the path, because they keep bumping into this glass wall. So yeah, mental illness is definitely a huge block. Anxiety is a huge block. Fear, overwhelm, perspective. Honestly, perspective is a very not talked about arm of mental health. People's perspective is very, very skewed it's based on past pain. Like, everyone's perspective of their current reality is based on past pain.
Yeah.
Future fear is based on past pain. And so what I do now is that I get these guys, like, we establish what the glass wall is. And so by removing that glass wall, I'm removing the things that are blocking you. Like, a lot of people don't understand, like, if you're 45, say, and you have this, fear of public speaking, and maybe public speaking is the thing that's going to get you what you want in life. And this is an example, but you have a fear of it and you don't know why, because you've never done public speaking before in your life. So why would you be afraid of it? And it's like, it's a public speaking thing. But really what it is that somewhere back in your childhood, maybe like at a basketball game, you missed the last shot and your team lost, and your coach was like, oh, you suck, you missed the last shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now you think that, like, you translate that past pain into this block that you have now in your present. And so what I do is if it's anxiety, if it's social anxiety, if it's depression, like, these things are choices. They're afflictions and they're mental illnesses, but eventually they are choices, and you're choosing it. So and they take up all your bandwidth, all your energy.
Yeah, totally.
So clear away all that stuff, and that glass wall just melts away.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Obviously, as someone who's been in the alternative health space for almost 20 years, I deal a lot with mindset. I deal a lot with the spiritual side of things,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. So I think you're like pretty bang on with the way the view of all of that. And perhaps I'm just going to add a couple of things where,
Yeah,
a good
please.
analogy for people to kind of wrap their head around. I always say that a lot of times the way that we're acting as adults is actually rooted in childhood, right? So if you just think about your programming, like your programming and your conditioning by your parents, by your teachers, by authority figures, by your friends, a good one that I always use for my clients in clinic is, I say to them, if you were 5 years old and you walked out into the backyard with your mother and you saw a snake in the backyard, right? Well, your mother's, there's a couple of ways that she could respond. She could go, oh my God, it's a snake. Snakes are terrible. They're poisonous. They can kill you. Like, get away from it. And from that point on, that's how you're going to respond every time you see a snake. So at age 45, you could just see a grass snake outside in your backyard that's literally 10 inches long and freak out. Okay. But the opposite is also true. Like, your mother could have said to you, well, look, here's a snake. We have to be a little bit cautious. Some snakes can be poisonous, but check out the cool scales. Wow, there's all different color snakes. So you have an appreciation for the snake. You have a healthy fear, if you will, of the snake, and it's more cautious, but that's how you're going to respond. If you take that line of thinking and you map it onto pretty much anything else, that is how we are as human beings. And I think the challenge that everyone has is, how do you deprogram yourself, right? How do we say to ourselves consciously and bring up that stuff from the subconscious into the conscious mind to say, man, you know what? Like for me, I have an inherent fear of dogs, right? Okay, that's my thing. Like, and I got attacked by a dog when I was like 6 years old. It wasn't like, it was brutal, but it wasn't like really bad. I don't have, tons of stitches and whatever, but it terrified me, like it
Yeah.
traumatized me. And now it's like, I'm so conscious of that. I know it, but every time a dog comes close to me, I can feel it like inside of me. I'm like ready to kick it in the head,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that as much as we're talking about fairly benign examples here, I think when you map that onto things like social anxiety, on perhaps, low self-esteem, not
Mm-hmm.
feeling good enough, isolation. I mean, I want to talk about isolation because
Okay.
that's a huge topic with addiction,
Yeah.
So I think that, you have some tools in your toolkit. Maybe we'll talk about that in
Okay.
a little bit as well. But yeah, I mean, how do you how do you get people to like reprogram themselves? How do they break through that glass wall, as you put it?
Yeah. So the glass wall is basically an event. right? Like it's an anxiety event, a depressive episode, a rejection,
Mm,
something, some kind of fear just overtook them and they, got paralyzed, like some sort of event that by the time you get to that event, it's too late. Like
yeah.
it's not, I mean, you can recover, but once you get to that event and you're experiencing that event, you basically have to experience the event as it is until it passes.
Mm,
But you don't have to get to the event, is what I work with all these
right.
guys.
Okay.
It doesn't have to go down that road that far. Like you don't have to get into an anxiety attack to understand that you have anxiety. And so what I do is I reverse engineer these events, all of these events, all these blocks or events, they're interchangeable. These are these things that stand in your way. Reverse engineer them all the way back to, like you said, the snake at 6
Yeah.
years old.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
reverse engineer it to the point where like we understand that that's a story that a 6-year-old kid made up. It's basically a misunderstanding that you had as a 6-year-old because you didn't have a frame of reference and you didn't have any other data, and you decided this is how it's going to be forever. And
Mm-hmm.
now look at your reality and look at like, let's look at the patterns that are in between those two events. Like, getting fired from a job and having a girl break up with you are the same event. You're getting rejected both times.
Just different clothing.
Different, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just wolf, yeah. Sheep in different clothing. Sheep in
Yeah.
wolf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you look at those patterns, like you can say, like, the same guy that always gets his heart broken is the same guy that's always going to get fired from jobs. Because how do you show up? What block is keeping you from showing up as your best self in relationships and in your
Mm,
job?
mm.
So
Um,
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. No, go
No,
ahead.
you first.
Um, so, just a couple of things that kind of like the bells are ringing here as well. Like I think we're kind of the same age. Maybe you're a little bit older than me, but I'm in my mid 40s now. And as someone who works with guys a lot, we spoke about isolation
Mm-hmm.
before. Um, and is that something that you see a lot of, like, guys feeling it's because when you're younger, there's always this kind of like tribalism. You're not married, you don't have kids, you can
Yeah.
just go and party all weekend or hang out with your buddies. And then as
Yeah.
you get older, like I've got 3 kids. You tend to, at least from speaking with other guys, this is what I've noticed, is that just responsibilities, you don't have as much time, etc. And so you tend to start feeling a bit more isolated in life and a bit more disconnected from other men.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like, do you see that a lot in the work that you do?
Yes, I do. And I see, there is that time commitment. And I work with a lot of guys because basically people will let their life run away with them. Like they'll
Mm,
let the kids run away with them. They'll let their job run away with them, where their calendar looks like a big ball of blue color. There's no
yeah.
definition in any of it, right? So that's one thing to do. The second thing is look at, like, if you can control your life and you're still isolating, then you're actually withdrawing. Like
Yeah.
so if you're withdrawing to protect yourself, if you're withdrawing because you're insecure, if you're withdrawing your emotions from your wife because you feel like if you show her that you're scared of quarantine, or if you're scared of COVID, or, I mean, that's just a relevant thing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it could be anything. Like if you show weakness, it's better to withdraw and just go inward than it is to be outwardly scared.
Mm,
And so that withdrawing now becomes a pattern. Now you isolate because it's safe and it's easy. It's easy to sit in your basement and drink beer and play video games or whatever.
right.
You don't have to show the world you're scared. You don't have to show your wife you're scared, because you're protecting yourself. But at the same time, you're killing yourself,
Yeah.
right? Because you're missing connection.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the old adage, where boys don't cry, right? So
Yeah.
and I find it's interesting, but I find that in many cultures, like, that's a very old school way of thinking. You know what I mean? Like there's still, I'm from South Africa, as you can hear. I'm not from here, but I find that when I was growing up anyway, a lot of the men were a lot more like affectionate to their children, affectionate to their spouses and whatnot. And so they kind of like, they weren't like overly emotional or anything like that, but they were a lot more open. And I
Mm.
found that when I came to North America, that was not the case at all. Like I found that guys were very much, we're guys, right? We
Yeah.
shake hands, we're dudes, and that's kind of
Right.
it. And then you never ever let down that guard. But internally, you have all these feelings and you feel a certain way, but you kind of like paint yourself into that corner again, and you got no one to share that with, right? And so what are you going to do, right? You either break it down and share it with someone, or you turn to something else that's just going to cover it all up.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear you say that about like growing up. For you, it wasn't like that, because my experience is like what you came to with North America.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of different theories on it. A lot of it, I'm the one that I hear the most, and it makes the most sense, is that it comes from wartime, like World War II.
Okay.
You know, the guys, that was the survival mode. World War II, it was like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, be a man about it, throw some dirt on it. All that stuff actually served these men in wartime. But
Mm.
they ended up raising sons like that, and then those sons ended up raising other sons like that. And now we're finding out that like that is not the most effective way to live. And so
Yeah.
now there's this disconnect with like, well, I have all this programming that shows I can't ask for help, and I can't cry, and I can't be vulnerable, because if I do, that means my wife is going to leave me, or I'm going to get fired. And it's all
Yeah.
these just really lies, really, because what we found now is that like with men's groups, and the connection is the most important thing, and the best way to get connected is to open up and be vulnerable and talk about like what's going on,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
really we're all feeling the same thing.
Yeah, and it's good to actually talk like this. I used to I used to live and work with the First Nations people here, right? With the
Hmm.
Indigenous people in
Yeah,
Canada,
yeah.
and so we would often have, like, for many years, I was with them, and so what we would often have is we would have men's circles. So
Mm,
everyone would get together for like 3 days. It would be a Friday, Saturday,
mm,
Sunday. There'd be a sweat lodge on the Sunday kind of thing.
mm,
But then what they would do is we would have all the men and the women together for certain portions of it, and
mhm,
then we would split all the men and the women up for other portions of it. And it
mhm.
was very interesting because for me as a young guy at that time, I was always like pretty open, just I think because of the cultural difference.
Right.
But once I started realizing that other people weren't, you sort of go, "Oh shit, I'm a bit of a freak," right? So then you treat,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
what was cool was being in those circles. All of a sudden, you would just see these guys just crack open, just crack open, and they felt comfortable enough to do that.
Mhm.
And the healing that came from that was so profound for a lot of people, because guys would just like crack open and let the demons out, and there would be a whole bunch of other guys around them that were fully supportive, where there was no judgment, and hey,
Yeah.
guys share some pretty dark stuff with you, and you just got to be like, we all have a past. And I think that looking to the future and acknowledging these things so that you can change them is really how you're going to change as an individual, and then ripple out into the greater world.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing that the native or the indigenous
Yeah,
stuff, because I've
yeah,
done some work with those groups too, and it's like they knew things long ago that we forgot,
yeah,
we just chose not to look at for some reason. But yeah, and that's the basis of what my practice is that like I want to provide space for these guys to heal. Like guys, men, it's not like everyone says toxic masculinity.
mm,
It's more wounded masculinity than it is toxic. Like
yeah,
the toxic is a symptom of the wound, like the toxicity of it. So if we can heal the masculine, we can avoid the toxic masculinity. But it really comes down to like, let's look at it as we're just wounded. And so, but we don't have a place to heal. We don't have anywhere to go. We don't have anywhere to talk and crack open like you talked about. So,
yeah.
a big thing for me is I want to provide the space in the room and hold that space for these guys to come in and crack open.
Well, that's awesome, man. And it's great to hear that you're doing that kind of work, because I really feel like it's so needed
Mm,
nowadays. Especially, stress levels are at an all-time high. People are panicked. People are confused about what's going on in the world.
yeah.
And for a lot of people, we're feeling hopeless, with where things are headed. And as we said in the beginning of this podcast, for a lot of folks, they're going to turn right back to the bottle, or turn back to the blow, or turn back to whatever it is
Yeah.
that gets them through the day.
Anger.
And I feel like for us, evolving as a global society, as human beings, I really feel like that's obviously not the right way to go. But it's difficult, because we're being presented with all of these things, and we're being asked to face these things head on, and it's terrifying,
Yeah.
for a lot of people. So yeah, it's really great that you're doing that kind of work. Before we wrap up, I just want to check our time here
Yeah.
today. Going through you got a program for guys. I noticed that you got a few steps. Maybe you can just kind of walk us through those steps so people get an idea of what, if someone wanted to work with you, or
Hmm.
what does that process look like, in terms of the 4 or 5 steps that you have outlined.
Yeah. So that's the online program that I have, is those steps where we kind of like I take you through a bunch of emails in the first 30 days, and then it basically gives you the tools so you can and we'll spend time defining your current reality. And then we look at what we need to remove to go forward. And then we remove all that stuff and then move forward. And then the last part of that is just accountability with group calls every week for 3 months. The VIP coaching that I do is one-on-one. We spend a lot of time together, like every couple of weeks, every week or two, depending on the situation. But it's really getting into like what is actually happening now. So the tendency for when you ask someone what's going on now, and they're like, well, I don't have this. I don't have this, which is saying that like, ideally I want this. And like, I get that. Ideally I see what you want ideally, but this is not doing anything to determine what is actually happening right now. Like why are we on the phone right now? Why are we talking right now? Define, like, give me only the facts about your life right now. So that's like, it could be any number of things. Fear, anger is a big one.
Anger's huge. Yeah.
Anger is very rarely ever just anger. You know,
Yeah.
it's grief, it's fear, it's overwhelm, it's insecurities, it's a lot of things that manifest as anger. So define the current reality, like deeply define the current reality. And then from there, I look back at, there's 4 stages of life. There's 0 to 7, 7 to 18, 18 to 30, 35, and then 18 to 33, and then 33 on. And so I make them break down each one of those sections and pull out like 3 big events, good or bad, that happened in those timeframes. So like your memories of those, and I stop it at 3 to 5, because if you go past that, you start to make up stuff. You know, like, well, this kind of mattered, but I'm not sure if it even happened then. Like, stop right there. It doesn't matter because you can't remember it.
Yeah.
Like, let's only deal with like what is really affecting you. So then we look at once you get all that data, you can see patterns. The patterns are there about relationships, about careers, about self, about anger, about your insecurities. All of it's there. And then we spend a little bit of time just, you know, everyone thinks it's like this massive undertaking to remove these problems, these traumas. And it is. It takes daily discipline and it takes some work. But really, you know, just acknowledging it and talking about it is like a 75% step in the right direction.
Yeah.
You know, after that, it's really about like, oh, I see that pattern happening now. I'm going to interrupt that pattern and not do that again, because I'm not going to repeat that pattern because it was painful.
Man, like that I think that you just raise a couple of points there, and the first one is pattern interrupt. You know, like that is just so huge, because when you're in your daily cycle, it's the day to day, it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then of course once you rope in like addiction and whatever else you're doing, that's also part of the pattern, right? It's just every day. And so interrupting that pattern is that first of all freaks you out, because you're like, oh my God, like there's this void all of a sudden that I'm not doing anymore in my pattern. And okay, well, the pattern's now changed. So where do you go from there? But the other thing, you know, you bring up things like anger as well, which I think is just so huge, not just for men, for everyone, but it's good for people to know that anger is really people get angry when there's nothing left. Right, like that's it, right? So it's like, I get like frustration means you've tried things and they're not working, so then there's nothing else left to do except get pissed off, right? Like that's all that's left over. And then you just keep hitting your head against the wall thinking that it's going to change, and it's not, you know, so you just get more and more angry.
You get, I mean, anger, like another manifestation of anger is that like, I don't want to feel this, so I'm going to get angry about it. You know, that's when you end up lashing out at your wife for no reason, or you know, kicking your dog, or lashing out at your, like, just like unsolicited, I call them unforced errors, like for no reason at all, dropping a grenade into your life. And this goes back to these patterns that we talk about, as painful as they may be, and as like destructive as they may be, for a lot of people, that is the comfort zone, because they know how to handle that. They know how to respond to that. They know, you know what, like, it feels good to get angry. It feels good to isolate. And so but they see that it's like ruining their marriage. But you know what? It's comfy here. Like, I like,
well, it's also there's no outlet, right? You know,
right.
so it's like, if everything's bottled up inside, it's got to come out somehow. So is it going to be a positive expression, or is it going to be a destructive expression? And if you got no positive outlet, or no, like, you know, roadmap kind of thing, then where's it going to go, right? It's only got a negative way to come out. and whatever that negative way is for you, whether it's, you know, substance abuse, addiction, anger, violence, whatever the case, that's how it's going to come out.
Yep.
So breaking the pattern and then kind of putting one foot in front of the other, just you know, every day.
Yeah.
That I always, here's another analogy that I think people will find useful. You know, if you're in the forest and you're walking through the forest, right, the path is very clear. So if you've been walking that path for 20 years, you know, you can close your eyes and walk the path. But when you're trying to make a new path, you got to break out the machete. Okay, you got to break out the machete. You got to hack down a couple of trees. And at first, the path doesn't seem very clear. But once you walk that path, the old path will grow over eventually, and you won't even remember that it's there. And
Yeah,
so
that's
I think
so
it's a
simple.
useful analogy for people, because I actually share those types of analogies with people on all kinds of other things.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's self-sabotaging behavior, whether it's eating disorders, whether it's, you know, so many people are motivated by fear. You know, we're not motivated by reward.
Yeah,
And I
that's the
think that when
problem.
you can motivate yourself with reward,
Yeah.
it's so much more empowering, because you don't feel like you're, what's the word? You don't feel like you're denying yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it's like people go to the gym and they're like, well, man, I've put on 15 pounds. I should probably go to the gym. So they go to the gym and then they lose the 15 pounds. And they're like, well, I don't need to go to the gym anymore. So I
Yeah.
lost the 15 pounds, right? And you just kind of like bounce back and forth, back and forth. And I feel like with addiction, particularly, that's like such a running theme, is just that back and forth. And you experienced that yourself, you know, for years.
Yeah.
Stop, start, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the thing you talk about, the punitive versus the reward based stuff, like, you know, what it really comes down to is like when you're that new path in the woods, like it takes discipline to keep chopping away at those trees, right? But everyone sees discipline as punitive. Like you said, I'm going to be, the joy is going to be taken away from me. Discipline is nothing more than self-love. All discipline is at its base level is a form of self-love. If you can shift that perspective from like discipline is punitive, but self-love is reward-based. Because if you make a decision to not, like you said, like talking about losing weight, if you're losing weight and you want to eat a piece of cake, but you know it's going to mess you up, like if you make that, if you can say like, oh, I'm disciplined and I'm withholding joy from myself, that's not sustainable. But if you say, you know what, I'm choosing not to eat that cake because I love myself, that's reward. That feels
Yeah.
good. That's sustainable. And then when you talk about, you know, always, what was it you said about always falling back with the addiction over like?
Yeah, you just kind of like stop start, right? So you feel good for a while, and then you kind of
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
back onto it, and then you feel shitty, and so then you go back to the
So
other way, and you just
yeah,
kind of flip flop the whole time.
the worst thing that can ever happen is I feel good enough, because like when you're in that pain of addiction or that pain of depression or that really bad anxiety, like that's really awful. And so what happens is like just a little bit of progress, just one step out of the woods is going to feel really good. And you're going to be like, okay, I can stop. But
Yeah,
really what you need to do is you need to take 10 more steps to
yeah,
get to really clear yourself of that pain. Because if you only get just enough to get out of the pain's too close, it's going to pull you back in.
yeah.
You have to do the work to solidify your progress and to build up defenses against that pain to fall back into it.
Right on. Well, Sam, I think it's a great note to wrap things up. You know, I'm sure we could chat for another hour or two.
Probably.
But thanks so much for coming on the show today. It's really good. You know, this is I think a great episode to open up with for season 4. I've personally like just took a huge step back from everything for the last 3 months or so. I have a newborn baby, so I just said, hey man,
Congratulations.
no podcasting, no whatever. I took a break from social media. I've just like
Yeah.
dropped everything, and really been focusing on my own clinical practice, on myself, on helping other practitioners. So and yeah, you know, in sitting and kind of contemplating all of this stuff that's going on in the world, you know, as I said in the beginning of the show, one of the themes that I really want to emphasize for this season on the show and probably moving forward is resiliency, is encouraging people to evolve and to improve as a person, as an individual, right? Because I do feel like if we can attain a higher level of consciousness as an individual, and we all do that, well, now the vibration of the whole planet is going up, right? We're all evolving consciously as human beings, and it all starts with you, you know, as the individual.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thanks so much, Sam. Where can we find your work, your websites? I'll obviously throw that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. Congratulations on your new baby. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah. The one thing like you talked about there, I just have one thing to add real quick.
Yeah,
It's
please.
just have compassion. compassion for yourself and compassion for others. That's the most sustainable approach. Don't beat yourself up when you don't do what you think you're supposed to do, because that's not a real thing either. So just,
Yeah.
I tell everybody, like, you just got to have compassion for yourself. This is all new for all of us. We're all learning. Even
Mhm.
without quarantine, we're all learning
Yeah.
anyways. It's
Yeah.
all new every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can find me on Instagram at Sam Gibbs Morris. At Sam Gibbs Morris. That's with 2 B's. On LinkedIn, my name it's just Sam Morris. A picture of me with a cowboy hat on. And then my new website, which launches next week, is samgibbsmorris.com.
Okay, awesome. And I'm going to throw that in the show notes for everyone.
Awesome.
So they can click directly to those and connect with you. Yeah, so keep on doing the work that you're doing. I think men's health, mental health, all of that stuff is becoming a very prominent issue. Not even just men's mental health. I mean, just mental health in general. But I think that it's great if you're pulling guys together and getting them around the campfire and getting them to chat about their problems man to man, which I think is important. So keep up the good work, and thanks for stopping by on the show today.
Thanks, man. You keep it up too, and great to be here.
All right, awesome. Take care.